Alison and Lee from the Bar Exam Toolbox, and today we're excited to be talking about moving forward after a bar exam failure. So let's say that you got bad news. This is kind of the right time of year for this from the bar examiners. Unfortunately, you've got to figure out a plan. What do you do now?
Well, first, it's totally normal to feel disappointed. Even words like devastated may ring true after failing the bar exam. And you absolutely need time to process your emotions. I think one of the main things to focus on is making sure that you don't bottle up your feelings of failure and shame. Because if you do, they will pop up when they are least productive, typically right before or as you're getting ready to take the next exam. So you do have to give yourself time to process. And it's also really important to kind of remember certain things about this exam, that it is a minimum competency knowledge of the law exam. It does not define your self-worth, your intelligence, what type of lawyer you're going to be. It's just one test, a snapshot of your work over a 2-day window, or even more if you have accommodations. And you really need to reframe this as a learning opportunity and an opportunity for growth. Now, if you just got bad bar exam news, like in the last few hours or the last few days, that might sound like not possible. But I really want to try and help you get there. You have to take time to evaluate what went wrong and what you want to do different this next time. And you want to look at how you can change your study approach, your mindset, and overall schedule to create an opportunity for success. So today we're going to talk through a few things that you need to do to set yourself up for next time and kind of rebound from this experience. But just getting ready to process and figure out what to do next is such a big step.
Oh, absolutely. I actually went to an interesting talk this morning. In fact, I haven't even told you about this, from a futurist. And I thought she had a really interesting way, really interesting way of looking at things. And so the exercise she had us do was to identify 6 to 10 assumptions about something. So in this case, it might be assumptions about what you need to do to pass the bar exam. And, an example might be, I need to do 100% of my bar review course and I will pass the exam. That might be an assumption. So, you write these down, whatever it is, whatever you're thinking off the top of your head, and then you flip them. So you actually say the reverse. So instead of saying, I will pass if I do my entire course, you say, I will not pass if I do my entire course. And so I think that can actually be a really interesting way of kind of getting into just a more blue sky, like open mind approach here of like, let's figure out what didn't work and do something differently.
What is a futurist?
They basically help people spend some time in the future so that they can then come back to the present and make a plan for getting to that point. The exercise she had us do was actually about dating. So like, what are your assumptions about dating, the way dating is now, that it might be also 10 years in the future? So some things like people will still be using dating apps 10 years in the future. Then you flip it and you assume that people will not be using dating apps. And then you kind of start looking for evidence one way or the other about like little bits and pieces of things they're seeing in the culture or trends that might be moving in certain ways. But yeah, super interesting job. Kind of want to be a futurist now. But I was actually talking to somebody else on our team about how this might resonate for people who are struggling with the bar, just to really help you identify those assumptions and really challenge them. Because I think whatever assumptions that people have made that about what was going to work, unfortunately didn't work. So you've got to kind of make some different decisions.
Can we have a futurist on the podcast?
I don't know, maybe.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Okay.
Super interesting. I'll link to her site in the show notes. But yeah, it was a really interesting conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, back to bar exam failure. Great side discussion. For most people who have a job, when they get bummer bar exam news, one of the first things you have to do is talk to your job. Ugh,
yeah, which
so
is
icky.
a bummer.
Yeah. The thing is, they probably know because most of the time it's public information after a certain point. And so not only did they know you were going to take the exam, but some jurisdictions are just going to tell them, based on how they publish results, whether or not you pass.
Right.
So own it. I would be upfront. Don't try and hide it or pretend that they might not remember that you sat for the test. It happens. It happens to plenty of great accomplished lawyers, as we know, have failed the bar exam. So I think the key is to speak to your job, not when you're in crisis, not when you're in that active grieving space, but when you're starting to, gather yourself to be able to have a conversation that is about kind of being productive and what you're going to do next. So, saying that you already are actively working towards how you're going to study again, you're getting feedback on your score report, or you are looking at score reports to try and understand more of what's happening, that you're looking at different preparation programs, being active and saying, I got this, I've got a plan, is a really good way to approach it. And also frame it as a temporary setback and show that it's not going to change your commitment to your job that you're doing there or becoming, a lawyer in the future. So, it's a tough conversation. I think we've done some podcasts about how to talk to your job specifically as well, but you just have to do it. It's so yucky.
Yeah. And the thing is, most employers have dealt with this before. It's not going to be a shock to them that somebody failed the bar. Like, it happens. Everybody understands it happens. Typically they're going to give you at least one more shot. Not always. If that is the case, that really sucks. We're sorry. But even then you want to leave with dignity and on good terms and potentially, don't burn that bridge for the future. But I do think you need to tell them pretty much as soon as possible. And it's okay if you don't exactly have a plan at that point, but you need to get one in place pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So, you can set up a call with us. Like, we'll talk you through some options, but you need to kind of go in typically with a plan, or you also need to figure out what they're willing to do. So, if you're working at a large organization, they probably have something in place where it's like, okay, we give you 2 weeks off. We also insist that you take another 6 weeks off unpaid to study or whatever it is. So you need to tell them, you need to find out what their options or expectations are. And then you really need to think about what's going to work for you and come back with a solid plan, I think is the best option.
Yeah. And you can say in those initial conversations, like, these are the things I have in place to do this week to develop my own plan. And I'm going to come back and we can talk about, full-time study, part-time study, depending on your job, like Alison said, they may have a plan. You may need a plan, but you want to start the dialogue and look proactive, like you're solving this problem that has come up for you.
And being a little upbeat, as upbeat as you can manage to be in this scenario. Like, nobody, it is a bummer, but the more you can approach it is like, okay, this is an unexpected challenge, but here's what I'm doing to make sure that next time I'm not in the same scenario.
Yeah. Another thing is that if your supervisor or whoever you're having this conversation with is being really supportive and helpful, make sure you're appreciative of that, because that is not always the case. And, being grateful, not groveling, but being grateful that that they are helping you come up with a plan or supporting you while you figure out what to do next. Again, that just shows that you are kind of getting your act together and being responsible and in dealing with this professional problem in a professional way, because it is a professional problem that needs to be dealt with.
And I think you also want to maybe try to get them on your team. So, everybody's on team. Let's get Lee to pass the bar exam. So, because you may need some additional support, you may need to work fewer hours, whatever it is. But I think the more you can turn it into like, this is an us versus the bar exam sort of scenario, the better.
Yeah. So once you've, at least started the conversation with work, then it's time to look at your support options. So you need to spend some time evaluating what went well the last time and what went wrong. And you need to explore all your options for preparation. It's not just what you did last time that is your rinse and repeat option. That is not the case. And often that is not the best solution. So, So you really need to kind of do this deep dive and say, what did I actually learn from? Was it lectures? Was it making my own outlines? And what didn't? There are lots more support options out there than there used to be. and you want to make sure that you've evaluated them. It's possible you just signed up for whatever support option was in the hallway of your law school, and that's totally fine. But if that didn't work for you, you've got to figure out why it didn't work so you can look to replace it with something that's going to be more helpful.
Yeah. Well, here I would say you want to look at this as objectively as possible too. So yes, you want to think about what kind of felt good or felt like it was working, but you also want to really look at your scores and say, okay, I felt like I was doing really well on the essays, but my scores do not support that. Or I felt like I was doing really great on the MBE questions, but my score there is significantly lower than I expected it to be. You've got to look at this stuff objectively so that you know what did not pan out.
Yeah, which is why it can be great to, meet with someone to discuss your scores. We talk to folks about their scores that are interested in working with us, but sometimes even academic support at your law school, even if you've graduated, we'll talk to you about that as well. If you feel like you're looking at this garbled list of numbers on a page trying to decide what they mean and you're not sure what they mean, there is someone who can help you navigate that. So
yeah, and they don't necessarily make it the easiest. And different states give you different information, and the way that they present the MBE score reports, if you get that, can be really confusing. So they're just you want somebody who understands this to be like, all right, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what it's telling me. So if you come to us and we see all 2s or 3s, that's a different problem from 6s and 1s. So we've seen enough score reports. So like, all right, let me ask you some follow-up questions to sort of figure out, do you fit into the pattern that I think you probably fit into based on your scores? And oftentimes, we're correct.
Yeah. So part of this is also starting to evaluate what happened last time you studied when you're starting to think about that plan to study again. And this is not a fun exercise because no one wants to go back and revisit their bar prep time. So
no, definitely not.
No. So the reality is you may need to change up how you were studying, specifically your study schedule. This time, you might find yourself needing to study part-time for a longer period of time because you might be studying in the evenings or on weekends if you have a job. So you need to think about how you're going to fit this in and what time will you actually have energy and focus to study. This is a huge one for me, is being able to have a brain that will be able to function and retain information is, for most people, that's not midnight, unfortunately. And a lot of times people want to focus on studying in these kind of little pockets, these extreme hours at 4 a.m. or midnight. And oftentimes that's not your best brain. It's very hard to study that way.
Yeah. So I think if you're working and studying, this is a really crucial problem to try to solve because you have to be realistic. I'll talk to people who tell me, oh, well, I have a 9 to 5, 9 to 6. So I'm going to study 4 hours every night and then all day on both weekends. It's like, okay, I don't really think that's probably going to work. That sounds great. That sounds really ambitious, but your brain is not going to be able to consistently do essentially a half day of work after doing a whole day of work every single day and then do full days of work on the weekends and never take time off. That's just not a recipe for success.
Yeah. The other things you want to think about is whether or not you need like accountability partner. Maybe someone who just also got disappointing bar news. You could have a study partner, an accountability partner, if that works for you. But again, you need to say, like, is this something that's helpful? And if it's not, don't do it. Just be really honest with yourself about what is going to be helpful and not helpful.
Yeah, I've even heard of groups forming on Reddit and things like that for like specific bar exams. I mean, Reddit hit or miss, but maybe you find some people who are in the same boat and you can actually support each other. And if nothing else, do check-ins of like, did you do your study time today? Like, make a commitment, stick to it, tell someone about it. Those things all can be really effective in making yourself do this.
Yeah. You also may want to explore different ways to memorize information.
That's a great one.
I know we're big fans of like handwriting as a form of memorization, but you need to like experiment because if you struggled memorizing the law, just don't go back and say, well, I made 1,000 flashcards last time. I guess I should make 1,000 flashcards because 1,000 flashcards might not work for you. So you want to be thoughtful and explore different memorization options and try them to see if they work for you.
Yeah, and I would say this is a great time along the lines of what you were talking about earlier, but to really think carefully about different study options. So if memorization was a really big problem, oftentimes that's because people were really overwhelmed by the material itself. So in that case, if you tell me, I was really overwhelmed, I didn't have a clear grasp of the law, then you need shorter outlines. So, you might want to look at something like Smart Bar Prep that we're fans of. That is just a shorter amount of material because that's going to make it easier to memorize. We've also talked about tools like spaced repetition, which is a tool that you can get that can help you memorize some of this information. But, I think that memorization is really key for people. So if that was something where you kind of fell down a little bit, and, we understand a lot of courses don't have you focusing on that until kind of probably a little too late. So that's something you want to incorporate throughout your preparation.
I also think you want to think about where you studied. This goes back to this idea of, do you have a good brain? Like, did you have the brain capacity to study? But do you have the location to study?
Yeah.
Are you planning on studying at a Starbucks, but you are very easily distracted? That may not be a good solution. You may be, clocking the hours, but not being able to really get the work done. So think about what worked best for you. But if you didn't have a good situation for where you studied, you may need a new plan this time around.
Yeah. And I think this can incorporate a lot of stuff. Like sometimes we talk to people who had like family issues, it was really stressful wherever they were being, trying to study. Maybe they were like living with parents and there was a lot of conflict. All of these things can unfortunately really sink you. So I do think it's worth considering, are there things that need to change in your study environment kind of writ large that might make your time more effective?
Yeah. And then do you need more accountability and coaching? There is nothing wrong with saying that you don't know what you needed to do differently and that you need someone to walk you through this process. I mean, that's what we do with our bar exam tutors. You can also look at different tools who can help you manage your tasks, but exploring all your options, including getting some expert help to help you get over the hump, makes a lot of sense, especially if you don't have a ton of time to study, because you do not have time to waste. If you want to be as efficient as possible, often having someone help you triage and make those choices can be very helpful.
Right, because there's kind of the level of figuring out what you need to do, and then there's the level of doing it. So to the extent that you can have somebody else kind of help you figure out what you need to actually be doing, and then you just focus on the doing of it, that can be a really big burden that can help free up a lot of time and mental energy. Because that sense of like spinning of like, I just don't know, like, should I be doing MBE questions today? Should I be doing essays? Should I be practicing? Should I be working on memorization? Like, what am I supposed to do? That's hard. And it wastes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, it does. Another thing that often folks need to consider is whether or not to postpone and not take the next exam offered. And
True.
There are a few things you need to consider about, whether you're going to study for the next administration. So first is, can you keep up your momentum and build on the studying that you did before? So, the best thing is to take the next one, generally speaking, because you are going to remember what you had already learned. So that is a pro for taking the next administration. The other thing is you can become licensed sooner if you take the next administration and pass, or you might have to wait like at least a year by the time they grade the exam and the results come out. And that can feel like a really long time professionally. It also might be cheaper to take the next administration because you can reuse some of your materials. Again, doing the same thing over again, typically not a great idea. But sometimes you get discounted access to certain materials that you will find helpful. And you need to see if those will be available if you delay. And you might be really motivated to never want to do this again. Because feelings of failure, even if you have a growth mindset, are yucky. And most of us don't want to do it again. So it can be a great motivator to just get this done. But really, you have to be honest about having the time and the money, if necessary, to study, because so often we hear stories of folks saying, like, I'm going to go ahead and study, but I'm also getting married right before the bar, or I'm moving, or both. Or both, or I have a 3-week vacation planned that I'm still planning to go on. I mean, there are lots of things that come up that are terrible for your study. and you want to be really realistic about what's going on. So be honest. And if you want to take the next administration, make sure you have the time and the finances to study again.
Yeah, and I think this can become a big issue when your job is sort of insisting that you must take and you must pass the next administration, but they're also not willing to work with you on having the time to do it. That is when you might have to have some really hard conversations and say, look, I hear what you're saying, like I need to pass, but what I'm telling you is I'm working 80-hour weeks and I have literally no time to study. So, something needs to give here if we're going to make this happen.
Yeah. The other thing you need to be very aware of is burnout, which I think happens more often the second time around when you're studying, especially for balancing work. We were talking about needing a good, solid attention span and some brain capacity to begin studying again. And so if you're feeling burned out, you need to take action on that because you really can't effectively learn anything when you're completely burned out. So be aware of that if you're going to take the next administration.
Yeah, I was in a thing yesterday where someone was talking about the lazy brain, and like basically our brain gets tired and doesn't want to focus. And so, over time, you just kind of are in that state permanently. So it's not a great place to end up. And you definitely want to be sure that, if you are going to take this next exam, that you do have some sort of realistic way to get there.
Yeah. And you need to find a good mental state. So you can check out therapy. If you've never been to therapy, you could do other mental health hygiene activities, journaling, lots of different things. But you need to figure out how to get yourself in a mental state to be productive, or it's not a good idea to take the test right now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan lately of acupuncture for like resetting your brain. So if you're super stressed out, like something like that might be worth considering. Anything physical like massage, whatever floats your personal like self-care boat. But I think you need to kind of be planning to double down on some of that because this is going to be kind of a stressful time probably.
Oh, yeah. I was just having a hard conversation with a friend and my hip has been bothering me, which makes me sound like a super old woman. It was like, oh, my hip. But as I was having this hard conversation, my hip was literally aching while I was talking.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It was so weird. I mean, it's not possible that those two things are actually connected.
Yeah, no, I get like right here, like right here, my shoulder I'll feel like I'll get like a burning sensation under my shoulder blade sometimes. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, time to take a walk around the block probably.
Exactly. So listen to your body, but make sure that you have some coping mechanisms in place if your ailments start to pop up due to stress. Now, if you're thinking, cool, I definitely need to take a break, what are the pros and cons of that? Well, I mean, hey, you can feel more rejuvenated because you may take a break and you're going to have some time to reflect, maybe really rethink your approach. You can gain a bit more perspective on life. I was actually listening to an audiobook this morning that was talking about how one of the reasons generally older people are happier is because they just have more perspective on life. Is that you kind of see how it all fits in. So you can get a little space, you can gain a little more perspective. Sometimes you can study for much longer. So if you're in a position where you don't have very many hours, you can study for 6 months or longer. I mean, there are realities that come with that, but that can be an avenue you can explore if you delay. And if you need to hire some help and you financially can't do it, you could work and save some money, which is also a benefit of delaying. And I've seen that work really well for folks who just were very honest about what they needed. And they said, I need 6 months to get it all together. And then they did and came back with focus and were able to pass. You can also gain some real world knowledge and legal experience before sitting again. And this could help with things like the performance test. Maybe you're going to work on your legal writing skills. If you're an English as a second language taker, especially a foreign attorney, sometimes you need to work on your just basic writing skills. It might give you a bit more time for that. So there's some space to work on some of those skills. But there are a few downsides, Alison, right?
Right. I mean, obviously, you're going to be further away from having actually studied this material, and you're putting off being licensed and being able to work. And I mean, maybe being able to work as a lawyer, at least. So I think, you need to probably have a pretty good reason to delay. But I think, as you said, we've seen it work really well. And I would rather have somebody acknowledge that they need more time and take that time and come back strong and feel confident and pass the next test versus just sitting for it again and failing again and then having to take the next test anyway. And, at that point, you've got to pay to take the test, like all of these things, not to mention just the disappointment and frustration. So if it's clear that you're probably not going to be ready, I think it's better to postpone, but you need to have a pretty good reason.
Yeah. But oftentimes, people don't really calculate what an attempt at this test actually costs. So you want to think about what it costs to purchase your prep course or your tutoring program, the exam itself, which is not cheap to sit for, any time spent away from work or your children. You may need to hire childcare to help if you have children. You may have to travel to a bar location. You may have to find a place to stay at that location. And there's just the opportunity cost of spending time away from all your other activities. So all of that is not to sound as depressing as it kind of sounds when I say it that way. But it's really to just frame your thought process of like, if you're going to give this a shot, like really give it a shot, because there are
like commit
because you are investing time, money, resources into this experience. So don't do it if you can't give yourself the chance to give it the good old honest try.
And I will say, I would highly recommend listening to advice from people who know what they're talking about in this scenario, because let's be honest, sometimes we get calls from students and they tell us, the situation, and we're looking at their scores and they're pretty far off. Our advice is basically, I don't think you have the time to make up this difference in the time you have available between now and the next test. Like, I really would recommend you postpone, start studying now, have more time, and then be better situated for the next test. And oftentimes they don't listen and they fail again. And then sometimes they're mad. But it's just like, I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm just actually trying to help you pass. And if your scores are really low and you don't have time to study, you're not going to pass. It's like there's no miracle solution.
Unfortunately not. I wish there was.
I know. I wish we had that magic wand. We could really really make a fortune on that.
It would be super cool. And so as you make these decisions, one of the big important things is to just get really good at asking for help, identifying how people can help you and asking for that help. So this is your moment to reach out to your village and make specific asks. And sometimes it's hard to think about how you can ask for help. So here's a list of things to think about how to ask for help from your village. So first, and I learned this from a friend who helps people in crisis, is communicate your needs clearly to your loved ones so they can provide practical help. And you need to say what you need, and then people love to show up in that way. So you may not need like trinkets. People love to buy kitschy, you this or stuff like that.
I would throw that out the window if somebody gave that to me when I would just fail the bar. I'd be like, this is so not helpful.
I know. So you're like, okay, but people do that because they have no idea what to actually do to be helpful. So if you tell them what they can do to be helpful, that will help. So one great way to solicit help is for food, because food is important because it keeps you healthy. It's also time consuming if you need to cook, and it's not good for your brain if you only eat pizza. So think about, could they cook for you? Could they make you freezer meals? Could they give you gift certificates, places, whatever it may be, make the specific ask. Maybe you need help with children or dogs or other life responsibilities. Ask for help with that. I've recently become very good at asking my village to show up and pick up my kid from something. And, when you're very specific, most of the times the answer is yes, because our village wants to show up for us. But you need to be specific and say, this is the way that you could help me. And most people are like, great, and I would love to help you that way.
Right. And maybe something like asking your friend to take a walk with you twice a week at a certain time, where you just commit to that. It doesn't have to be something that they spend money on. It might be something they spend time with you. Yeah. But really thinking through okay, what would be helpful and who might be willing to help me with it, I think is so valuable.
Yeah. Planning a movie night where you can get together and decompress. Even walking your dog or going on a walk with you with your dog, meeting you for yoga, whatever it might be. Just, making those specific asks. And then, not to be a broken record, but you must get the mental health support that you need. We talk about this all the time because it's getting easier and easier to get mental health support. You can meet with therapists virtually now. There are all these apps that can connect you with a therapist. You may still have access to some school resources, depending on what your school rules are about stuff like that. But if you are struggling and having, obsessive thoughts about failure, if you're super stressed, if your hip hurts all the time and you have hard conversations, it might be a good idea to go check in with somebody to help, manage whatever you're going through. And now's the time to start, finding those resources like before you get deep into your
yeah, definitely.
And then, as we said, you got to talk to your employer about your needs and see. Sometimes employers will be really accommodating, like really accommodating.
Oh, yeah. No, they might give paid time off. In some cases, they'll actually pay for support. We sometimes have firms pay us directly for tutoring because they want you to pass. They hired you, they like you, they want you to succeed. And a lot of people may need some type of financial assistance, which could be, loans, families, different things. I mean, that's a tough part too. Like you said, a lot of people may need to work and maybe this isn't the right time until you can actually put those financial resources together to get the support that you actually need to get this done.
Yeah.
And your school might be able to help you. A lot of schools now, particularly with bar rates kind of being where they are, they will let you come back in and work with people and give you feedback. But you should definitely check with your school on anything they have to offer you because you already paid for that.
Yeah. And lastly, I think if you're concerned about needing accommodations and maybe you didn't get accommodations the last time or you didn't have time to appeal, make sure that you reach out to the state bar as soon as possible or any disability services that might be available at your school and see what your options are going to be going forward. I constantly remind students of this and they thank me for it. So I'll just say it on this podcast again. Accommodations level the playing field so you can compete on the same level as the person sitting next to you. So it doesn't give you an edge. It's not cheating. There's nothing negative about needing those accommodations. It allows you to compete fairly with everybody else. And so actively going and getting the accommodations that you need is incredibly important and something that you should spend time on.
Yeah. And I think I will say in the UBE world, if one state said no, that doesn't mean every state will say no. So that might be worth looking into. And also sometimes people have new things, maybe you've developed back pain or you're breastfeeding or whatever it is. There may be things that would impact your ability to take this exam that you need to think about getting accommodations for that maybe didn't even exist when you took the first test.
That's very true. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time for today. But Alison, any final thoughts for those who are getting some bummer news this week?
Well, I mean, it is a bummer. And I think just sitting with the fact that this is disappointing and it is probably upsetting is step one. And then at that point, you really have to sort of evaluate the situation objectively, realistically, and make a plan and then really commit to that plan because no one can guarantee that if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to pass. So I think there can be some stress around that too. But you just have to really commit to a plan that seems reasonable and go for it and give it your best shot.
Yeah. I also think of an old blog post on our website about the fact that no one eventually will ask you when or how many times you sat for the bar.
True.
And nobody asks after a certain point. So it feels like the biggest moment in your professional career right now. But in just a few years, once you're licensed, no one will ask if you took the bar once or twice or 3 times. They won't ask where you sat for it. Folks take the exam on so many different schedules for so many different reasons that nobody even assumes if you got licensed a little bit after your graduation date that it has any real meaning. So you have to try and keep perspective and remember that this is a speed bump in your legal career, but it is not necessarily the defining moment that it might seem it is right now.
Absolutely. I think just keep perspective, move forward. And even if someone does later bring it up, you say, yeah, you know what? The first time it didn't go well. I came back. I studied again. I passed. It was a hurdle I overcame. Yep. Next question.
I know. So many people have failed the bar exam.
It's just like
you can
so
Google
not
that if you want,
Yeah. No, it's such a common experience. And, it is really not fun to go through, but it is definitely something that people can come back from.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. And please subscribe so you don't miss any future content.
Yeah, and you can check out barexamtoolbox.com.